My Weird School Fast Facts Mummies, Myths, and Mysteries. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pellot. The Beginning. Howdy, fellow weirdos. This is your old pal, Professor AJ. Did you know the ancient Egyptians invented toothpaste? It's true. I'm in the gifted and talented program at school, so I know lots of stuff that normal kids don't know. So na boo boo on you. Okay, you want to know a secret? Ancient history is a super snooze. Who cares about stuff that happened thousands of years ago? Not me. I don't even care what happened last week. Now wait one gosh darned minute there, Arlo. Oh no, it's Andrea Young, that annoying girl in my class with curly brown hair. She calls me by my real name because she knows I don't like it. Who invited little Miss Know-It-all? You know perfectly well that we're supposed to work on this project together, Arlo. And ancient history is fascinating. I bet most kids don't know that the ancient Egyptians liked bowling. I bet most kids don't know that the ancient Greeks figured out the size of the earth and that the sun is the center of the solar system. I bet most kids don't know that people in ancient Rome ate stork, roast parrot, flamingo, and peacock tongues. And I bet most kids don't know that the ancient Egyptians used to pull the brains out of mummies through their noses. We're not going to talk about gross stuff here, Arlo. Remember we talked about that? No disgusting things. And no toilet stuff. Okay. You're no fun at all. Writing this book is going to be lots of fun, Arlo. We're going to tell the readers all kinds of cool stuff, like how ancient people lived, what they were, what they ate, what they believed, and what they did for fun. I can tell the readers one thing right now. Ancient people were weird. Yours truly, Professor AJ, the Professor of Awesomeness. Andrea Young, future Harvard graduate. Part 1. Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was one of the greatest and most powerful civilizations in history. It was rich in culture, government, religion, and the arts. It lasted for over 3,000 years. The United States of America isn't even 300 years old. Zzz. Oh, sorry, I must have dozed off there for a minute. Were you talking about how the Egyptians pulled the brains of mummies out through their noses? No, nobody cares about that stuff, Arlo. If we're going to talk about ancient Egypt, we should start by talking about important things, like the pyramids. I think the coolest thing about ancient Egypt was the pyramids. Just look at them. They were built thousands of years ago, and they're still there. My grandpa's house was built less than 100 years ago, and last year they tore it down and replaced it with a parking lot. Arlo and I had lots of questions about the pyramids. We had to do a lot of research to answer them. How big are the pyramids? The largest one is the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's over 480 feet tall. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty. It weighs as much as 16 Empire State Buildings. For almost 4,000 years, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. Are all pyramids the same? No. There are around 80 pyramids that are still in Egypt, and there are different sizes and shapes. The first pyramids were called step pyramids because they have ledges that look like big steps. The earliest one that still exists today was built in 2630 BCE. As their technology advanced, the Egyptians built bigger pyramids with smoother, sloping sides. Why were the pyramids built? They were built as burial places for the pharaohs, the leaders of the Egyptian empire. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built for King Khufu. What's inside the pyramids? There was the burial chamber for the pharaoh, of course. There were also burial chambers for his family and his servants. The walls are often covered with carvings and paintings. Some of the pyramids have lots of rooms and passageways. Some rooms were filled with the pharaoh's treasures and personal belongings. Wow, so a pyramid was sort of like a big coffin with a storage unit. Those pharaohs must have been real hoarders. Actually, they were buried with their belongings because it was believed the pharaoh would need all that stuff after he died. Did people try to steal all that stuff? Yes, the architects who designed the pyramids tried to fool grave robbers by putting in fake entrances, false doors, and passages that led to empty rooms. They used heavy granite doors that were almost impossible to move. But the thieves were smart, and over the centuries, nearly all the pyramids were broken into. Many treasures were stolen. Who built the pyramids? It took around 10,000 workers, more than 30 years to build a pyramid. For a long time, experts believed that slaves were forced to build them. Now we know that the pyramid builders had hard lives, but they did get paid for their work. They must have been respected too, because the ones who died during construction were buried in tombs near the pyramids of their pharaohs. How were the pyramids built? It wasn't easy. First, the workers cut large blocks of limestone. Then they pulled the blocks up the pyramid with ropes, using wooden sleds on top of round logs. To this day, we marvel at how much the Egyptians were able to accomplish without trucks, cranes, or any of the other heavy machinery we use to build things today. It took so long to build a pyramid that the pharaohs would usually start building one as soon as they became ruler. That way, it would be ready by the time they died. When did they stop building pyramids? Around 2150 BCE, the age of the pyramids came to an end. After that, most of the pharaohs were buried in a part of Egypt called the Valley of the Kings, which was west of the Nile River. The tombs could be hidden high in the cliffs there, and the valley had a narrow entrance that could be guarded. Maybe that's why grave robbers never broke into the tomb of King Tut. We'll talk more about him later. What's with that weird statue near the Great Pyramid of Giza? That's the Sphinx. The what? The Sphinx. That word definitely looks like it's spelled wrong. It's not. A sphinx is an imaginary creature that has the body of a lion and the head of a person, often a pharaoh or a god. There are lots of them in Egypt. They were built to guard tombs and temples. I guess they didn't do a very good job then. Maybe if the Egyptians had hired human guards, the grave robbers wouldn't have stolen all that stuff from the tombs. Here's a weird fast fact about the Sphinx at Giza. It has no nose. Somewhere down the line, the nose got knocked off. Some people say Turkish soldiers who were taking target practice shut it off. Other people say it was chiseled off by somebody who thought it was evil. We'll never know for sure. It's one of those ancient mysteries. Mummies. Speaking of ancient mysteries, mummies are really mysterious. They're cool, too. Gross, but cool. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but they used to pull out the brains of mummies through their noses. You did mention it, Arlo. But we should probably start by telling the readers that the ancient Egyptians believed that after a person died, he or she would pass into an afterlife. It was supposed to be a lot like real life, so the body would need to be preserved as long as possible. The process of preserving the body was called embalming, and the embalmed body was a mummy. I know everything there is to know about embalming and mummies. First, priests would wash the body. If you're going to eternity, you want to be clean, right? Then they would pull out all of the dead person's organs. That must have been weird to take an organ out of a body. Why would there be musical instruments inside a body anyway? Not those kinds of organs, dumbhead. Internal organs are the person's lungs, kidneys, stomach, and things like that. I knew that. I was just yanking your brain. Anyway, they would use a long stick that got inserted into the nostrils to dig out the brain. Then they would roll the body over so the liquid would drain through the nose hole. It was a no-brainer. Gross! I know, right? But they didn't pull out all the organs. They left the heart inside the body because they thought it was the center of intelligence and emotion. They thought the brain was useless. Sort of like your brain, Arlo. Funny. So funny that I forgot to laugh. What did they do with all those organs that they took out? They put them into containers called canopic jars and left them in the burial tomb with the body. They would have 4 canopic jars, one for the stomach, one for the intestines, one for the lungs, and one for the liver. Next, they would carefully label the jars and put them in the refrigerator so people wouldn't confuse them with last night's leftovers. Arlo, that's ridiculous. They didn't have refrigerators in ancient Egypt. I know that. I just wanted to see if you were paying attention. It would be weird to take some leftover spaghetti out of your refrigerator and then find out it was some dead guy's intestines. Anyway, next they would fill the body with sawdust or linen stuffing to make it look the way the person looked before their insides were removed. After that, the body would be covered with stuff called natron, which was like salt. It drew moisture out. Then they would let the body dry for around 40 days. Wow, I had no idea this was such a complicated process. Oh yeah, it could take months to finish making a mummy. After the body was dry, oils would be rubbed on the skin to preserve it, and the mummy would be wrapped in linen from head to toe. If you unwrapped all the bandages of an Egyptian mummy and put them together, they would stretch for nearly a mile. Glue was used to hold the layers together. Finally, a shroud was put over the mummy, and then the mummy would be placed in a stone or wooden coffin called a sarcophagus. Many mummies have been lost to history. Some of them were burned for fuel, some were destroyed by treasure hunters, and some were ground up into powder to make magic potions. Yuck! Sometimes a mummy's mouth would be left open so it could breathe in the afterlife. You know, it used to be that scientists had to unwrap a mummy to examine it and learn all this stuff. But these days, they can use X-rays, MRIs, and CAT scans. And by the way, ancient Egyptians didn't turn every dead person into a mummy. It was expensive, so only rich and powerful people got the full mummy treatment. Most Egyptians were just buried in pits in the desert. And that's everything you need to know about mummies. Well, I must say, Arlo, I am impressed. You may not know anything about reading, writing, social studies, or math, but you sure know your mummies. Mummies are my specialty. Well, that and anything to do with ancient toilets. No toilet stuff. Okay. Egyptian inventions. The Egyptians invented lots of stuff we use today, like toothpaste and breath mints. Arlo, that's crazy. No, it's true. They made toothpaste out of powdered ox hooves, ashes, burnt eggshells, and pumice. I'm glad I didn't have to brush my teeth with that stuff. No wonder the Egyptians needed breath mints. They made them out of frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and honey. It was all shaped into little pellets. Here's something you probably don't know. The Egyptians invented eye makeup. No way. Yes way. They combined soot with a lead mineral called galena to create a black ointment called kohl. Women and men wore eye makeup, but they didn't do it to look good. They did it because they thought makeup had healing powers. But we should talk about the more important things the Egyptians invented, like writing. Hieroglyphics was a form of writing using pictures. They had more than 700 different pictures. The thing is, for almost 2,000 years, nobody was able to figure out what those pictures meant. Then, in 1799, a Frenchman named Jean-Francois Champollion finally cracked the code by examining a piece of black stone that was found in the city of Rosetta. It had 3 kinds of writing on it, and one of them was Greek. Champollion could read Greek, so he was able to figure out what the hieroglyphics meant. That black stone is called the Rosetta Stone, and it's in the British Museum in London today. A lot of Egyptian writing was found on stone tablets or walls, but they also invented a kind of paper called a papyrus. It was made from a tall reed-like plant. For over 3,000 years, papyrus was state-of-the-art writing material. They also undertook the first major irrigation project. They built canals and ditches to get water from the Nile River and move it to faraway fields to grow crops. They also invented the solar calendar. The Egyptian calendar was a lot like ours. One year had 365 days and 12 months with 30 days in each month, plus an extra month of 5 days. They also invented the clock. In fact, they invented 2 different kinds of clocks. A shadow clock was sort of like a sundial. The position of the shadow that was cast would tell people what time it was. A water clock was made from a stone vessel that had a hole at the bottom. As the water dripped out slowly, they could tell how much time had passed. Smart. Gods and pharaohs. The Egyptians worshipped lots of gods, over 2,000 of them. Ra was the sun god, Horus was the god of the sky, Thoth was the god of knowledge, Apophis was the god of snakes, Babi was the god of baboons. Yes, you read that right, there was a god of baboons. The pharaoh was the leader of Egypt, and people thought of him as both a man and a god. In all, there were about 170 pharaohs. We don't have room to talk about all of them, but we've got to tell you about the big one. King Tut. His real name was Tutankhamun. When his tomb was discovered in 1922, King Tut was lying in a solid gold coffin, surrounded by more than 5,000 priceless treasures, gold, jewelry, furniture, clothes, weapons. He had 130 walking canes. There was so much stuff buried with King Tut, it took 17 years to go through it all. One of the treasures buried in King Tut's tomb was a pair of sandals with pictures of his enemies on the soles. That way, wherever Tut went, he was stomping on his foes. King Tut is called the Boy King because he became pharaoh when he was just 9 years old. Can you imagine being named ruler of a country as a kid? That must have been cool. If it was me, I would have made homework illegal. On the other hand, maybe it wasn't so great to be a kid king because Tut died when he was 18 years old. Nobody knows for sure how he died. That's another ancient mystery. For a long time, archaeologists believed King Tut was murdered. There was a large hole in the back of his skull. But now they think the hole was caused by the mummification process. These days, most experts believe King Tut died from a wound to his leg. He also suffered from malaria, and that might have killed him. There have even been archaeologists who believe that King Tut died from the bite of an angry hippopotamus. Only men were supposed to be pharaohs. Not fair. But there were some exceptions. Hatshepsut was the first female to rule with the full powers of a pharaoh. Archaeologists believe she had a skin disorder and died after rubbing on a medicine that turned out to be poisonous. Then there was Queen Nefertiti. She's often called the most beautiful woman in the world. And finally, of course, there was the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra. She has an amazing story. Listen to this. When Cleopatra was 18 years old, her father died. She and her brother, Ptolemy VIII, became co-pharaohs. But he was just 10, so Cleopatra was in charge. As Ptolemy got older, he decided to take control. He kicked Cleopatra out of the palace and took over as a pharaoh. Well, she didn't like that, so she built an army and formed an alliance with the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar. We'll talk more about him in part 3. They also happened to fall in love. Ew, gross. In 47 BCE, Caesar arrived in Egypt and Cleopatra snuck back into the palace, hidden inside a rolled-up carpet. Caesar defeated Ptolemy's army and Ptolemy drowned. Cleopatra was a pharaoh again. But that's not the end of the story. 3 years later, Julius Caesar was assassinated. His son Octavian became the leader of the Roman Empire. A Roman general named Mark Antony wasn't happy about that, so he teamed up with Cleopatra to go to war with Octavian. They also fell in love. Ew, gross. Sadly, Cleopatra and Mark Antony lost the war and died by suicide in 30 BCE. Cleopatra let herself be bitten by a poisonous snake called an asp. The ending to the story is that Octavian took control of Egypt and it became part of the Roman Empire. And that was the end of the ancient Egyptian Empire. More weird fast facts about ancient Egypt. Some experts believe the first pharaoh was named Aha. Aha! The Nile River was like Egypt's main highway, and most of the people lived near it. They built their houses out of the mud from the Nile. The river also provided food, soil, water, and transportation. Most of the country was desert, but the land near the Nile was good for growing barley, flax, and wheat. According to the ancient Egyptians, the earth was flat and round like a pancake. What were they thinking? Now, of course, we know that the earth is square and shaped like a waffle. Families saved a lot of money on clothing because kids under the age of 6 often didn't wear any clothes at all. Boys under 12 years old had their heads shaved except for one braided lock. This was supposed to protect them from lice and fleas. While ancient Egyptians made many advancements that we still use, They practiced some cures for ailments and diseases that we would never try today. Believing it would cure blindness, they would mash up a pig's eye, mix it with red ochre, a kind of iron ore, and pour it into the person's ear. Do you know how they treated infections? They put moldy bread on them. One cure for bedwetting was to tie a bag full of mouse bones around the person's neck before they went to sleep at night. You should try that, Arlo. Your face looks like a bag of mouse bones. The Egyptians thought cats brought good luck and considered them to be sacred. When a cat died, the owners would mourn by shaving off their eyebrows, their own eyebrows. They also liked dogs, lions, and baboons. Ancient tombs contained lots of mummies of people's pets. Pharaoh Pepi II came up with an idea to keep flies off him. He would order some naked slaves to stand near him and have honey smeared all over them, so the flies would bother the slaves instead of him. While that sounds awful to us today, you have to remember that pharaohs had almost unlimited power. The ancient Egyptians mostly used donkeys as their beasts of burden. It wasn't until much later that they used camels. They judged a man's status by the length of his beard, and they would wear fake beards. Regular people wore small beards about 2 inches long. Kings wore longer beards with square ends. The gods had the longest beards, and these were curled up at the tip. Because they consumed so much beer, wine, bread, and honey, the Egyptian pharaohs were often overweight. They should have gone on Weight Watchers. It worked for my mom. Guess what Egyptian pillows were made out of? Discarded mummy brains? No, rocks. Ouch, that's gotta hurt. Hey, did you know that Egyptian police officers out on patrol would sometimes have monkey assistants? I did. Did you know that kids like to play with spinning tops, clay balls, and wooden animals? They also played leapfrog, jacks, and tug of war. And get this, the Egyptians liked bowling. In the town of Narmouthias, archaeologists found a room with a bunch of lanes and balls. A lot of ancient tombs had toilets in them, but sadly, magazines hadn't been invented yet, so constipated Egyptians had nothing to do while they were sitting on the bowl. No toilet stuff, Arlo. Let's move on to our next ancient civilization.